forward facing sonar when you're looking at fish live and watching your bait and watching them come eat it, it's changed the whole face of the sport. So I think we're going to have to do something about it.
So the bass fishing community is more divided than it's ever been before, and it's because of this. Forward Facing Sonar, the latest and greatest fish finding technology that's being embraced by some and wants to be erased by others. So it's an interesting conversation. A lot of the community wants to get rid of it, and a lot of the community says we should embrace it. This is just a take from an outsider looking in. I am a fishing fanatic. I am a full-time fishing guide. I have LiveScope. I use LiveScope. I rely on it daily. But in terms of the competition realm, and even for the sake of the fish, there is something to be said that when technology advances, the fishing gets harder, fishing gets worse. And I think that statement is very true. Reason I say that is, think back when Navionics, a mapping technology, was released over a decade ago now, like maybe 2 decades ago. It took you a lot of time on the water to find these sweet spots. And then with a click of a button, literally overnight, your spots were available to everyone. Like everything's highlighted and you can see it all, and all the depth contours in greater detail than we've ever had before in our mapping. That made fishing different. The forward-facing sonar debate is an interesting discussion. I really wish it wasn't such a polarizing conversation, because we all do have the same love for the sport, for the same love of the outdoors and fishing in general. We shouldn't be hating on each other because we have different views on what this technology or how this technology should be used. But Hank Parker recently came out in his podcast. It was one of the last questions asked on the episode about electronics in competition, and he had a lot of really good insight on the topic. So I clipped that part of the podcast. We're gonna put it up here. Let's get right into it and watch it together.
All right, last question. Do you think there should be a fishing league with no use of electronics?
I would not say no use of electronics. I would say forward-facing sonar. Now, this is going to get real controversial, and I tried not to enter this arena. I tried not to throw my hat into the ring. I've listened to Randy Blockett. I like Randy. Randy and I are friends. And to be honest, I thought Randy was a little bit too critical. But the more I listen to him and the more I look at what's going on, I'm tending to agree with him. Now, I've never thought that Randy was being, as some people have said, over the top and just bitter. I've never thought that. I've always known he's been heavily opposed, but I didn't really see the amount of change that forward-facing sonar was bringing to fishing. And there are a lot of people out there that are winning tournaments today that really are not very versed in the sport of fishing. They really don't know very much, and if you took that forward-facing sonar away from them, they wouldn't really know what to do. And there are a lot of great fishermen that are now depending on forward-facing sonar that do know what to do, but they don't do nothing else because it's such a proven method for catching big fish. So I honestly think, truthfully, it is hurting our sport. I think it's hurting our sport in a lot of ways. One, it's expensive. And high school fishing is very near and dear to my heart. And there may be 1 or 2 kids that their dad has forward-facing sonar. The rest of the kids, the boats don't have them. And the kids that have them are dominating. And so now the other dads and the other boaters feel like we're going to have to add that. And the cost is prohibiting for a lot of them. So the playing field is no longer level.
So that's an interesting take on it. Bass fishing has always been an expensive sport. Just the overall cost of bass fishing in general is just going through the roof. And forward-facing sonar is really amplifying that. He's not wrong. It's like fish finders aren't cheap. The boats aren't cheap. But there is something to be said. A guy could definitely compete in a John boat, and he can compete with the guys in a $100,000 boat. So it's like the boat wasn't the definitive factor as to how you can compete. It's like maybe the guy in the John boat can't get around as fast as the guy in the bass boats, but I've seen guys win tournaments in aluminum boats when there's the whole field is nothing but shiny, glossed out bass boats. So guys are saying he's hypocritical because he's always promoting Humminbird and like those electronics are expensive, and he never had any problem promoting them throughout the years, but it's not the same. It's like now we're talking about electronic technology that if you don't have it, it's really hard to compete with the guys that do have it. It's a great first point, I think. It's definitely expensive. Bass fishing's always been expensive, but now it's kind of being amplified with the forward-facing sonar.
I just think it's hurting. People are not buying lures like they used to buy lures. They're just buying things that are compatible with forward-facing sonar.
That's another great point, actually, because you would just buy lures like impulsively, whatever caught your eye, whatever you thought would work. Like, oh, that square bill crankbait, you're going to buy that, and you're going to buy it in 2 different sizes and 3 different colors, just in case, you know, conditions change and you're going to try different things. It's like interesting he says that, because as technology has progressed, it's like the lures that we're using with that technology have gone back in time. You know, the jig and the minnow essentially is what it is. It's like a Ned head, a Demiki rig, the Cindy rig, what is it, the hover rig. It's like it's all the same. It's all the very most basic way of fishing, and it's just kind of funny how it's going in full circle.
I think it's hurting our sport. I've said you could not stop technology, and a friend of mine said, you're right, you can't. But do you realize that there is a rubber compound that they can put in a golf ball and make that golf ball go 30% further? Or put it in a baseball with the same impact from the bat, it'll go 30 to 35% further than a current baseball. That's technology. But the Major League Baseball League said no. It will ruin our sport. It will make our stadiums obsolete. It'll make all the history of home runs absolutely obsolete. The PGA says it'll destroy all the history of golf. So no, we're not going to allow it.
That is an extremely interesting point. Just really interesting to put it in that context, you know, where these high level of sports have drawn a line in the sand saying, no, we're going to maintain the integrity of our sport by having these same guidelines throughout. You know, metal bats are not allowed in the MLB. This rubber compound he's talking about in the balls to make them go farther. It's like it would shatter all the previous records. That's extremely interesting. Another point with the PGA I know of, that like you're allowed to use a rangefinder, which is like the scope to tell you exactly how far from the pin you are. You're allowed to use rangefinders during practice, but you can't use them during competition. So that's extremely interesting how they've structured their highest level of the sport. And maybe that's something that Bass and MLF is going to have to consider, that maybe they'll allow, you know, live scope to be used during practice, but not during competition days. Just something to consider.
And as I think about that, that's almost where fishing is today. Major League Fishing, Bass, they're going to have to really look at this thing closely and say, okay, nothing wrong with technology, but it's messing up our sport.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to regulate it and disallow it at some point in time. And it's not going to do anything but get more advanced. I work for Humminbird. I love Humminbird. They have worked so hard to develop this, and it's a part of competition. But I don't think anybody, I know I haven't, has really sat down from a technical standpoint and say, you know, this could jeopardize our sport. It could really hurt things. I think that's where we're at. I think it's hurting things. I think we're going to have to stop at some point, step back, and take a look and say we're going to have to disallow it. So as far as electronics, no, I think we need to know how deep it is. Maps, I think from a safety standpoint, maps are so incredibly important. It's really made our sport safer. But forward-facing sonar, when you're looking at fish live and watching your bait and watching them come eat it, it's changed the whole face of the sport. So I think we're going to have to do something about it.
It's a heavy, heavy conversation. He's saying it's going to change the history of our sport in the sense that, like, the guys with 20 to 30 years experience are being outfished by guys that have more experience with the electronics or that are more in tune with their electronics, where forever it's been the other way around, where the guys with the experience would have the intuition on how to adapt to changing conditions, and they would always be at the top of the standings. The other part of the argument is that, you know, every sport is dominated by young blood, so this is just the way it is. Like, young kids come up, they are prodigies of the sport and they do well, and young blood dominates every highest level of competition. But fishing's always kind of been different in that regard, where experience will trump stamina, if that makes sense. But now we're at a time where experience is being trumped by electronics. So just another interesting take. It's an interesting time in the world of bass fishing. I wish the communities were not so divided. I wish everyone could kind of open their minds and understand both sides of the arguments, or what's the best way to move forward. I know in the saltwater world, like in billfish tournaments, the highest level of bill fishing tournaments, they have sonar division and non-sonar division. So you can join whatever league you want, and both are highly prestigious leagues. It's like, maybe that's the way we have to go. It's like the guys that are against live forward-facing sonar and the guys that are all for it, they can join their respective leagues and everyone can be happy. Maybe that's the way we go. Banning it is definitely not the answer, but regulating it might be. Let me know what you think in the comments. Make sure you go subscribe to Hank Parker's fishing channel, the Hank Parker Fishing Magazine. Thank you, Hank, for the great insight. Thank you guys for watching. Drop the anchor on the subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next one.